Hey, it's Kate with Yoga Healer. I'm going to solo cast this one on brain fog, information overload, and not being present with family. So this is an issue, right? Like people are more distracted. Screens obviously are an issue. The stickiness of technology. Those are all massive factors. Really anything that increases chronic systemic inflammation, which if you've been paying attention to this podcast, know I've been more or less talking about that for the last couple of, months, past year, I think. So even like a processed food diet, you're not going to be able to concentrate as well, meaning you'll have brain fog. If you also have aggravated kapha. And so what's that? So let's unpack this a little bit about like, what is brain fog? What is information overload? I would put information overload more in the category of vata. And I would say I would put brain fog more in the category of kapha. And so where does pitta fit in all this? And it usually goes to low tejas. So in this episode, I'm going to explain all that because I think as Westerners, who are interested in yoga or interested in feeling great or interested in personal evolution, that understanding this from a doshic perspective might give insight that you can't get from the West. That's what got me into Ayurveda, was there's something that you can't get. You can't get from the West. You can't get from a outside in perspective exclusively, but you also need to understand how energy in the universe work from an inside out perspective, which means that your subjective experience matters. That's important. It's an important part of understanding. So that brings us into what are vata, pitta, and kapha, and what is brain fog, and what is information overload. So let's just start with defining some terms here. So energy, as such, energy, just think about energy, like what's energy? Well, there's wind energy, and there's sun energy, and there's magnetic energy, and there's electrical energy, and there's all these different types of energy. But when we look at from an Ayurvedic perspective, there's energy as such, and then the energy divides into the energy that creates, the energy that maintains, the energy that destroys. So the energy that creates is anabolic, it grows. The energy that maintains is metabolic, and the energy that destroys is catabolic. And this to me is the easiest way to understand these forces or doshas in the body. So if you have too much catabolic energy or energy that destroys things, then you are in a self-destructive pattern, right? So how does that pertain to information and overload and social media and email and all the text messaging and all the Facebook messaging and all the WhatsApp messaging and all the things, right? That kind of goes into the information overload. That would be when there's too much to be digested. When there's too much stuff in the mind and the subtleness to be digested, it's catabolic. It starts to break the system down. It's too heavy of a load, so it breaks down. So it's like when there's too many things to do that you can't do anything effectively, then the system's breaking down. That's catabolic energy. In Ayurveda, that's the energy. There's a term vata, and vata means the wind. So when the wind is too windy, when that wind energy is cranked up too high, it dries out the plants, it dries you out, it dries out everything. And that dryness itself creates a breakdown of the structure of life. It destroys. So when there's too much, if your mind is going here and your mind is going there and your mind, oh, there's another message on my phone. Oh, I haven't turned the notifications off. Oh my gosh, yesterday I was at the airport and I looked at my phone and I was like, what the heck? Why are there all these notifications? Like something, I did a phone update and it changed my notification settings on like 12 apps randomly. And I get zero notifications. I do not want to be notified. Thank you. I really like my privacy. I'm very sensitive and I really like not being interrupted, but having continual train of thought. So I don't use notifications for anything. So anyways, I had to go and turn off all the notifications and reset my settings. So if you're constantly being notified by things, it's hard to have consistent train of thought. That's wind energy. Your mind is blowing this way, and then your mind is blowing that way, and then your mind is blowing up and down and in and out. And that creates, on an emotional level, it creates instability. It also creates a sense, like if every one of those conversations you're supposed to do something with, like respond or care, let alone think, then now there's just too many directions your mind is trying to go at the same time. And that's destruction. That catabolic energy is the energy of information overload. So in Ayurveda, we would say that would create a vata imbalance in the mind. Now, a vata imbalance in the mind is felt in every cell of the body. This came up last week in a Body Thrive live coaching session. So for those of you who know what that means, we have a course called Body Thrive. It's year long, and it's basically to get your habits in rhythm so that your life is in rhythm, and so you're in rhythm, so you get to experience a much better, much more grounded version of yourself. So anyways, one of those calls last week, so I was on Body Thrive, and someone asked me about this. How is the mind in every cell of the body? In Ayurveda, there's a term called a shrota, and a shrota is a channel. So the mind carrying channel is everywhere. It's in all cells. The mono mind, vaha carrying shrota, channel, mind carrying channel. Now, if you have that windy, chaotic, unpredictable energy in every cell of your body, it creates, again, more of that catabolic pattern, that destructive pattern. It creates anxiety, and that is one of the many patterns that chronic systemic inflammation takes. So if someone is chronically, chronos means Greek over time, chronically over time in that place of feeling overwhelmed or overloaded, or simply putting more information into their senses, in this case, it's eyes and ears, right? Where you're scrolling, you're responding, you're texting, you're talking. There's too many conversations happening. There's too much happening. It creates vibrational energy cellularly that is catabolic, that is destructive. And so that creates a sensitivity. The immune system comes in to try to basically respond to the situation. But the problem is when that happens over time, day in and day out, you end up with chronic inflammation. This is actually really fascinating, I think, for many of you. How does information overload affect digestion? You ever think about that? Well, in Ayurveda, the power of digestion, of absorption, is controlled by samana vayu. Samana is it's this back and forth energy in your small intestine, particularly in your small intestine and large intestine. And it's this back and forth movement that allows nutrients to be absorbed into your bloodstream out of your gut. With information overload, with that catabolic energy, with vata high in the body, wind will go up and out as opposed to penetrate down and inward. Like the wind will bounce off the earth, essentially like that. It'll bounce off buildings. If you've ever been in a wind tunnel, you're like, oh yeah, it will, right? So the wind takes the path of least resistance. So it needs space element. Space is up and out. Outer space is up and it's out. So vata, if vata is aggravated in the body, it goes upwards and outwards into the great almighty space. But the problem is when you're trying to digest food, it's got to go down and out, baby, right? Think about it. In through the mouth, out through the anus. That's a downward channel. And so this downward descent, there's special names for everything in Ayurveda, right? Because it's imported from another culture. Vata, the wind, has 5 different directions it can go. It can go down, that's Apana. It can go up, that's Udana. It can go back and forth, we talked about that, that's Samana. It can go from the center outward, that's Vyana. And it can circulate, that's Prana. So that downward flow, that Apana Vayu, that downward flow of energy is essential for everything from pooping regularly, which means within an hour upon arising, having a complete bowel movement, which is a big pile of poop, essentially, having a complete bowel movement, that's under the functionality of Apana Vayu. So if that's not working, you know Apana Vayu is disrupted. That's a natural rhythmic flow that makes you feel great all day. And you know what I'm talking about if that's happening for you. It's like, yeah, that feels good. Now let's go day. Now, if Apana is not working, Udana is working more, meaning it's going off more. So the energy from downward to upward, from your intestines, upward to your stomach, upward into your head, outward into the world, that's on overdrive. And that's what's happening with information overload. People aren't pooping. People weren't even pooping that well 10, 15 years ago, FYI. Back when I was working with this guy who, he was a business consultant for Traditional Medicinals, which is like the biggest medicinal herbal tea company in the US at the time. And 15 years ago, their number one seller was Smooth Move. Yeah, no joke. So humans have been constipated before iPhones. All right. Up and out. Digestion is down and in. So, boy, that you're going to have bloating. With bloating, you're going to have malabsorption. That's that samana vayu, that back and forth energy. And that's a problem, right? If you think about it, if you're not absorbing what you're eating, even if you're like, oh my gosh, I only eat biodynamic, organic, vegan, paleo, blah, 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 right? No matter how perfect it is, if you've got information overload, you're not getting the most out of it. How do you get the most out of life? And what you find is that equation usually has a lot to do with high quality, low quantity. High quality, low quantity has to apply to information. When you do that, and you're also naturally, by being the paleo vegan type, right, you're also already paying attention to that, most likely, in terms of what you're putting into your mouth. You want to have that same quality of filtration in through your eyes and in through your ears as well. Ayurveda is very specific about this. And what's wild, to me, what's wild is like they knew this a few thousand years ago. If you even just look back to like some of the texts that were written 2,000 years ago, it's like really clear causes of disease, like overuse, misuse, or abuse of the senses. I mean, they didn't even have screens. They figured that one out already. That's bewildering to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, wow. Simply, to me, that means that there was like obnoxious people a few thousand years ago. And if you paid too much attention to obnoxious people, then like it would basically destroy your mind. It would destroy your meditation practice. It would destroy the potentiality for much deeper levels of thinking.
Hi, it's Kate with Yoga Healer. Most of my life, I struggled with body weight. I'm a Pitta Kapha constitution, which means with the Pitta part, I have a strong appetite. And with the Kapha part, I love eating, and I love that feeling of feeling full. There's a very simple habit I learned, but it took me a longer time to learn than I find it takes me to teach other people. And this is the habit of intermittent fasting. I wrote a guide on it lately, and it's at yogahealer.com/intermittent-fasting-guide. And it's a 60-page ebook that I've designed after guiding hundreds of people into the habit of intermittent fasting for their body type. So if you're a Vata Pitta, or if you're a Pitta Kapha, or you're a Kapha Vata, you're going to find much more specialized information how to make the transition into intermittent fasting in a way that's going to be the easiest way for you. Now, the yogis have used meal spacing or rhythmic eating or intermittent fasting, it's all the same thing, for eons, literally for 4 millennia. The reason the yogis would use intermittent fasting was because they found that it shifted their system into rest and digest mode. When you're in rest and digest mode, you're not in fight or flight. So if you're trying to actualize bigger goals, you want to be in a calm, steady, focused state of mind. That's one of the big reasons I transitioned into intermittent fasting, growing a global organization, leading the team, leading my course members, being a mother. All of these things required me to step into another level of intentional living, of focus, of deeper sleep, of deeper rejuvenation. And I found that intermittent fasting, it not only checked all those boxes off, but it also checked off this underlying perpetual war I was having with my own appetite and desire to eat a lot. Through intermittent fasting, I'm easily at my ideal body weight. I'm able to focus. I'm stronger when I ride my bike for hours up mountains. In the intermittent fasting for your body type guide that I wrote, I'll talk to you about how to make the transition and how to use intermittent fasting for people of different ages, whether you're a teenager, a young adult, a middle-aged adult, or you're in your elder years. There's also information on socializing. Like, how do you socialize with intermittent fasting? What does that start to look like when you're eating on a different schedule than maybe the people that you spend the most time with? I really walk you through all of the lessons learned I've had, not just in my own personal experience, but also guiding hundreds of other people in my Living Ayurveda course and in my body course into intermittent fasting. The guide is only $5.70. I made it super affordable, so you're not making a choice between whether you should buy this guide or not. It's simple, and you can read it online. And what you're going to find is that if you want a little bit of extra support, you'll be invited into the intermittent fasting course at a greatly reduced price. In general, just start with a guide. It really is my brain dump of all that I've learned in the years of intermittent fasting. How my clothes fit me better now in my 40s than they did in my 20s. What you'll find through the intermittent fasting guide is you'll get to know more about your metabolic type. You'll get to know more about intermittent fasting, but you'll also understand more about why the yogis have used this habit for so long and how you really have two operating systems, fight or flight or rest and digest, and how to decrease your stress through this very simple habit of intermittent fasting. So go to yogahealer.com/intermittent-fasting-guide to get your intermittent fasting guide. Namaste and have a great day.
All right. So information overload is going to affect your digestion. It's going to affect your elimination. It's going to affect your absorption. Now, you affect absorption for too long. This is where you have chronic information overload, which we already know goes to chronic systemic inflammation. When this happens over time, what you have is poor quality tissue, because your tissue of your body, in Ayurveda, they say there's 7 layers of tissue, right? You've got your plasma of your blood, your red blood cells, your muscle tissue, your fat tissue, your bone tissue, your bone marrow tissue, your reproductive fluid. 7 layers of tissue. If those go swimmingly, meaning you're making the most out of what you're putting in, high quality, low quantity, body's making the most of all the nutrients, you end up, this is so cool, this concept, you end up with Ojas. And what's Ojas? Like, Ojas is like the bomb. That's what Ojas is. Ojas is the power of resilience and adaptability. It's wild. It has the opposites. It's the deep sustaining energy that enables your organism, you, to know self from other. Now you might be thinking, that sounds a lot like the immune system. Because isn't that the immune system job, to like attack the stuff that's not self? And isn't it an autoimmune disorder when that's really confused? When the self can't tell the self, the cells can't tell what is self from that which is other, that which should be attacked and destroyed? Isn't that when the body starts to attack itself? Yes, you're right. You're right. So this ability to tell the difference between what is self, because the self is so compact. This is actually one of the definitions of health. It goes back a few thousand years in Ayurveda. One of the definitions of health, a compact body. Just like ask yourself, like, am I compact? Do I fit that? Can I check that box? And if you're not, that means that there's undigested stuff in your system that is destroying your body's ability to tell self from other. And that can be changed. That's why people take Body Thrive, is they're like, I gotta get a handle on that. Okay. Information overload, digestion, absorption. We can check some of those boxes off. This is the thing about all of this conversation around brain fog and information overload and not being present is that there's an underlying distraction from your goals. Like, what is it that you're actually trying to do? My second book, Master of You, in the process of developing a course member community, which happened years before the book, right? Where it was just like, how do you hit your goals and achieve them? My course members were asking me that. Because I've been teaching these online courses since 2007, right? So I've had members for a very, very long time. People have the same questions over time, right? And when they see someone successful, they're like, how are you doing that? So they asked me to create a course. You know, how do you hit financial goals? How do you hit body goals? How do you hit family goals? Like, you know, it's basically like, how do you do it? How do you make it easy? It seems easy. And that was Master of You. In the process, what we found in trying to coach people in the beginning, especially, but it's still true. Actually, it's in the beginning, especially, we realized it was a problem. Now we know it's a problem. People don't know what they want. They're told what they want, you know, by their parents. Like, actually, lots of people have embedded goals from their parents, even if they're like 50, 60 years old. They haven't really figured out what they want. Some of it's cultural, right? What am I supposed to want? What am I supposed to want? As opposed to, do I even know what I, as a unique spark of creation, do I know what I want to do in my lifetime and in this next chapter of my life? And what we found is that, like, most people didn't know. And we still find that. Like, people are in the ballpark of not knowing. It's like, it's pretty wild. And I don't think it's because we have that disorganized of a following either. I think it's just that, the question often hasn't been given an appropriate time and space for deep exploration. So that's a big problem. I mean, in Master of You, in the course, I just rewrote the course after, well, I've updated that course regularly, but I did a massive rewrite based on like what's working, what's not working. And I spent a month with a lesson basically every other day on getting people deeper and deeper into the process of excavating, because it's an excavation process, into figuring out what they want, what they really want. Because once we have that, then we can strategize towards that. But there's no point in having a strategy if you don't have a goal. So that's what's happening so much with brain fog and information overload, is people don't know exactly and specifically what they want. Now that process increases the force, the energy of pitta. Now pitta is that maintenance energy, but it's also the energy of, on a subtle level, of discrimination. So pitta, refined, becomes tejas. Tejas is discriminating, meaning that you choose the thing, you choose the one thing. There's good books on that. The One Thing and Essentialism are two of the best books on like the one thing. You choose the one thing, and then you basically put on blockout blinders on everything else, and it focuses your attention like a laser beam. Now, modern humans, I find in general, don't want to commit. And so what happens is, because they're not committed, they want maybe 5 things, kind of, but none have had a deep enough exploration. They want 5 things. So the mind keeps rotating back and forth between all those 5 things randomly, and that increases vata. And we've already been through what that turns into. So the actual focus, pulling the mind into a centralized point, that increases the ability to actually burn through information overload, because now you're like not going to get distracted by all that stuff. You've got your blinders on. Interestingly, it pierces through the brain fog. So let me talk a little bit more specifically about brain fog. I alluded in the beginning to that brain fog is more of a kapha condition in Ayurveda. So let's look at this. Information overload is more of a vata condition. Brain fog, what you usually have happening, and it can happen first from information overload. So it can be more of like a secondary layer. Doesn't have to be, though. It doesn't have to be connected to information overload at all. Is what you have is you have a lack of digestive fire, or you have too much stuff coming in through the mouth. So we talked about too much stuff coming in through the senses. The sense here would be the tongue. If someone's usually eating emotionally at this point, meaning like they feel like they did a great job at work that day. So they have a nice big meal to end the day with whatever, maybe a glass or two of wine. They take in more calories than their body can digest. When this is chronic, meaning it's happening every day or most of the time, that the body's not able to digest the inputs that are coming in, you have a buildup of undigested stuff in the system. It's gunk, it's goo. It's called ama in Ayurveda. You can even think about it like this, like if you have a fire, say you have a campfire and you're putting in logs, you're putting on your nice little campfire, you're putting logs in. And you keep putting logs on, that's your food coming in. And you keep putting logs in. Eventually there's not enough heat and there's not enough air in order to digest. And so what happens is you get smoldering, and that's more or less what happens with ama. You don't get logs burning nice crisply. You get this smoldering effect. And that smoldering is absorbed into the bloodstream and it's circulated. And remember, the mind is in every cell of the body. So stuff comes into your gut. When it gets absorbed into your blood, it's now circulating through all of your cells. All right, it starts to get on the move. It starts to get pumped out from the heart. It starts to move throughout the body after it goes through the liver. So what happens is the body gets overwhelmed in time. And there's this heaviness, there's this grogginess, there's this bogginess, and there's this fogginess. That's literally just part of the quality or lack thereof of tissue making process in your body. So everything gets a little bloated, everything gets a little boggy, everything gets a little foggy. And soon the mind is having trouble with retrieval. You're like, what's that person's name? Where did I leave that thing? And you're having a hard time with focus. You're having a hard time even remembering who you are and what you're up to. Like, what are you really doing today? You lose context with your mission of that focus. It can't pierce through. So with brain fog, and often this will hit women in menopause, where they think it's from menopause, and it's really not. It's from what they've been doing in the past few years that's built up. And now the body's in a transition point in which it's trying to go from gross to subtle. It's trying to become more and more rarefied and refined, but there's sludge. There's sludge in the system. And so what happens is all of a sudden, is the body's trying to pivot, trying to transition. That transition puts an extra load on a system that's already overloaded. If the system isn't overloaded, it's not a load on the system. It's a graceful transition into subtlety, into refinement, into becoming more exquisite, into integrating all your life's lessons learned over the past few decades of your life as you're transitioning into another phase of life. But if the cart is already overloaded and you now are asking for change, that overloaded cart can't pivot and the stuff starts to break down. That's why it can happen in menopause. All right. So that's a little bit about brain fog. I mean, what I would, all of these, to me, all this stuff points to, like, we're doing a yogi detox. It's where a lot of people start with me, is the yogi detox. We're doing a detox. We do it twice a year. Go to yogidetox.com. Find out more, get your ticket. Basically what we find in that, and I'll do a separate show on this simplicity of detoxing, of when you just start to stop the madness, right? When you go into very high quality, low quantity living, the body naturally digests what it doesn't want. And that's the process of detoxing. And in that process, you get insight. So your sight turns inwards. And with insight, you get next level direction. That's part of how Pitta becomes tejas. It's partly that. But you have to turn your fires up. And part of turning your fires up is high quality living, low quantity living. Your senses, right? What's coming in. And you start to get much, much more specific about that. And the rest starts to fall away. And if you do it right, which means in community, which means with other people. So you're not isolated, you're connected. That means that people can actually help you go deeper into your insight. Because otherwise what happens, you'll get distracted and you'll start bouncing around on the surface and doubting yourself and all that, and that goes nowhere. So when you do it right, which means in guided community, which means with higher level intelligence, what happens is you emerge refreshed, inspired, attuned, and ready for action in a way that's grounded. Upon a value's been reset, your feet are on the ground. And you're no longer looking this way and that way and up and down and all around and taking in all this stuff. You're focused and pointed in the direction that you most want to go. All right, that's Brain Fog and Information Overload. This is Kate Stillman with the Yoga Healer podcast and all things Yoga Healer and Yoga Detox and Body Thrive. Thanks for being a podcast listener. Mwah! Bye.